بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين نستعينه ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونستنصره ونستجيره ونستهديه ونستشيره ونستشهد به فإنه حقا من هداه الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. اللهم يا علي عظيم ندعوك أن تقسم لنا من خشيتك ما يحول بيننا وبين معاصيك، وأن تقسم لنا من رحمتك ما يقربنا من طاعتك، وندعوك ونسألك يا رب العالمين أن ترزقنا من اليقين ما يهون علينا مصائب الدنيا وأحداثها. وصل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. As I'm sure all of you know by now, there is a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza and Palestine. A ceasefire that, of course, leaves the Palestinians with the monumental amount of destruction that has been caused in Gaza. Entire buildings razed to the ground, families left homeless, often in homes that they spent a lifetime working and saving to buy an apartment in a building somewhere. Now, to deal with the fact that this apartment is rubble and their home is rubble. Numerous hospitals hit, governmental infrastructure destroyed, and the blockade that suffocates Gaza continues, so that more than 2 million Gazans in this small plot of land continue on with their grossly inhumane living. After the ceasefire is established, the Palestinians pour out in the streets celebrating. And it's as if the Israelis couldn't handle seeing the Palestinians waving the Palestinian flags and rejoicing. Right after Jum'ah prayers were finished in the Al-Aqsa mosque, the Israeli police once again attacked the Palestinians gathered around the Al-Aqsa mosque in Al-Haram al-Qudsi, in the sanctity of the Al-Aqsa mosque. And the clashes resulted in numerous Palestinians wounded and hurt, numerous Palestinians arrested. And it was an entirely avoidable clash. The Israeli police didn't have to attack the Palestinians who were gathered around the Aqsa Mosque after Friday prayer, celebrating, but they demanded that the Haram al-Qudsi, the area around the Aqsa Mosque, be evacuated and that all Palestinians remove themselves from this area immediately. And when they didn't, they attacked them. So we return to the status quo. The status quo that has been going on now for more than 70 years. Palestinians living in refugee camps, Palestinians living in subhuman conditions, an exception to all the law that has been generated by the international society since World War II and even before World War II. An exception to the law of war, an exception to humanitarian law, an exception to the right to self-determination, an exception to the right of an occupied people to resist occupation, an exception to the right of a native people under occupation to exercise self-defense against their subjugators and their occupiers. In international law, it is very clear that a people under occupation have a right to resist this occupation, to fight the occupation. But that right, miraculously, is not recognized as something that the Palestinians can exercise. The United States, as it has done numerous times, prevented the Security Council from condemning Israeli aggression. And as always, the United States has made sure that there is no reference and works very diligently to make sure that at least at the level of the Security Council and at the level of many other international organizations, that the right to Palestinians to resist occupation is never acknowledged and never recognized. And that the entire Western world, at least, only speaks about the right of Israel to defend itself. So the occupier has a right to defend itself, but the occupied is simply expected to accept its subjugated status and to plead with the occupier to recognize its rights. Israel, since the Oslo Accords, has confiscated the majority of Palestinian land in the West Bank. What remains of the West Bank that has not been confiscated or annexed or settled by Israeli settlers are hodgepodge, little isolated spots. The Oslo Accord, instead of being a peace accord, turned out to be a license to Israel to colonize and to further usurp Palestinian territory. And through it all, the Palestinians are expected to accept their subjugated status. The last time Israeli politicians spoke about a peace solution with the Palestinians, the last time Israeli politicians spoke about a Palestinian state and a two-state solution with Rabin, who was assassinated by a Jewish extremist. A lot of people do not know that peace with the Palestinians since the assassination of Rabin is like a dirty word. None of the politicians who dominate the Israeli political field speak about peace with Palestinians, leave alone speaking about the Palestinian state. What used to be the Israeli left, which was considered to be relatively less racist, less colonial, more accommodating, has all but disappeared. And the only real force that exists in the Israeli political landscape is the right wing and the further right wing. It is as if the left has disappeared from Israeli politics. And as we in the United States sit and engage in polite talk about Israel's right to self-defense, Israeli discourse, at the same time that Israeli discourse celebrated normalizations of relations with the Emirates and Bahrain and Oman, and at the same time that Israeli discourse celebrates the developments that they see in Saudi Arabia and see normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia as inevitable, their discourse towards Palestinians became more and more extreme with the years, more and more fascist, more and more exclusionary. It is as if in the Israeli psyche, if you make peace with the dictatorial rulers and tyrants of the Gulf state, if you make peace with the leaders of Bahrain and the leaders of Emirates and the leaders of Saudi and the leaders of Egypt, if you make peace with these tyrants who oppress their own people through and through, then you no longer need to worry about the Palestinians as human beings, leave alone as people entitled to rights under natural law and under international law. In other words, under every humane system of law known to humankind. But there is a very narrow development during this last confrontation that drew my attention and that warrants some reflection. When Israel started bombing Gaza, let me take a step back and say, since Israel started open relations with countries like the Emirat and not so secret relations with countries like Saudi. Israel adopted a very interesting discourse that deserves pause and reflection. Israel got in the habit of designated spokesmen that represent the Israeli perspective to the Muslim world, speaking not English, not Hebrew, but Arabic. These representatives do something that is fascinating. They often speak about what Islam requires of Muslims, what Islam demands of Muslims. So at one time, a few years ago, the Arabic-speaking representative of the Israeli army reminded the Muslim world that Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab was a great reformer and that they should never forget the great reforms of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. That same spokesman talked about how the Ottomans have always oppressed the Arabs and that Arabs should never be fooled by the Turks who intend to dominate and subjugate them exactly like the Ottomans dominated and subjugated Arabs. Again, this is an Israeli spokesman talking about to Arabs about the Ottomans. In other words, watch out for the Turks. Don't get too friendly with the Turks because they just want to re-establish the Khilafah. Hardly any time passes without the Arabic-speaking Israeli spokesman quoting the Quran or quoting Hadith to Muslims to tell them what Islam demands of them as a religion. But when the bombardment of Gaza started, the Israeli army did something very interesting. They sent out a tweet that I saw. It was deleted now. It's been deleted now. But I saw it and I read it. Send out a tweet saying that the bombardment of Gaza started and quoting in full Surah Al-Fil. Surah Al-Fil, as I'm sure you recall, ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بأصحاب الفيل ألم يجعل كيدهم في تضليل وأرسل عليهم طيرا أبابيل ترميهم بحجارة من سجيل فجعلهم كعصف مأكول. As I'm sure you know, Surah Al-Fil talks about Abraha when he attempts to tear down the Kaaba and Allah sends birds that stone the army of Abraha and smashes it to pieces. So the Israelis start the bombardment of Gaza and they quote to Muslims Surah Al-Fil. The implication is clear. They're drawing a parallel between the birds that Allah is talking about of having stoned the armies of Abraham to Israeli planes stoning Palestinians. Now, what was the Israeli army doing when it quoted Surah Al-Fil as they started bombing Gaza? What was the Israeli army doing? Were they claiming that they are bombing heathens to uphold God's cause? Were they saying that the Quranic revelation about the armies of Abraham that are bombed by birds applies to their air force as they are bombing Gaza? Are they mocking Muslims and saying, your God says, I've sent birds to bomb an invading army, but look here, we are bombing you and there is nothing you can do about it? Are they mocking Muslims? Or are they usurping the Quranic discourse and saying that they are the righteous party? The ambiguity of what Israel does with Islam is not an accident. It is actually quite intentional. Let me mention another piece of the puzzle before trying to put it all together. There were many demonstrations that went out supporting Palestinians all over the world. But there were no demonstrations supporting Palestinians in the Emirates. There were no demonstrations in Saudi. There were no demonstrations in Egypt. And it is not because the Emiratis or Saudis or Egyptians don't support the Palestinians, but because in these authoritarian, totalitarian countries, supporting the Palestinians is not permissible. And in fact, in these same countries, if you raise the Palestinian flag in the street, you would be promptly arrested and you would disappear behind the sun. In these recent events, every Egyptian that tried to even just raise the Palestinian flag in a public space was promptly arrested, until now disappeared. We often talk of the colonial nature of the Israeli state. And many of Israel's supporters don't like that type of talk and say, how could you refer to Israel as a colonial state? Why can't you just refer to Israel as a normal state? But look at the enormity of the price tag that comes with Israel. In order for Israel to secure its place in the region, while not giving Palestinians their rights, because in Israel's view, if they give Palestinians their rights, the very state of Israel would be threatened. But in order to continue denying Palestinians their rights, and in order to continue existing in this region while feeling secure and safe, you must make sure that you never deal with the masses of the countries that surround you. You must make sure that you never deal with the Egyptian people, or the Saudi people, or the Emirati people, or the Omani people, or the Jordanian people. Because if you deal with these people, the results are unpredictable. If they are allowed to exercise their autonomous will, you don't know what they would decide vis-a-vis Israel. So what is the solution? It is in Israel's highest interest that countries like Egypt and Saudi and the Emirat are ruled by tyrants who, like in the same way that Israel ignores the rights and the will of the Palestinian people, these tyrants ignore the rights and will of their own people. These tyrants adopt the same racist attitude towards their own people. Israel adopts the attitude towards Palestinians: shut up and do what you're told. Don't interfere with our quality of life. But the tyrants of Egypt and Saudi and the Emirat adopt exactly the same attitude towards their own people. You're stupid, you're inferior, you're irrelevant, you're marginal, so shut up and do as you're told. A country like Egypt, what the Egyptians think about the fate of this country is completely unimportant. The only thing that matters are the tyrants who have extensive connections with so-called democracies in the West, and of course Israel. It doesn't matter what the Saudi people think or want. It doesn't matter what the Iraqi people think or want. It doesn't matter what the Emirati people think and want. The very dynamic of a colonial state is never deal with the masses of the natives. Never allow the natives to have a will of their own. That's very dangerous, because then we won't be dealing with Arabs as a racial category. We won't be dealing with Arabs as a racial category represented by tyrannical head figures like MBS and MBZ and Sisi. We will be dealing with the Egyptian people, with the Palestinian people, with the Saudi people, with the Emirati people, and the will of these people if represented through democratic institutions, would be layered and complex. And then Israel's life would be infinitely more complicated. So step one is make sure that the Emirat continues to be ruled by an MBZ. At every level, a thoroughly disgusting human being. And Saudi continue to be ruled by MBS. At every level, a thoroughly disgusting human being. And make sure that Egypt, with its population of over 100 million, continues to be ruled by Sisi. A criminal, a man who should be tried for crimes against humanity. Now, please understand, all of these people are criminals. Look at the crimes that MBS has committed. Look at the crimes that MBZ has committed. Look at the crimes that Sisi has committed. All of these people should be in prison. But instead, we want them to rule their natives and package the will of their natives in dealing with us. So Netanyahu doesn't have to worry about the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Emiratis, the Palestinians as human beings. No, they're faceless masses represented by criminals. Faceless masses represented by people who should be in prison, rotting in prison. But instead, the American government thanks Sisi for his efforts in bringing in ending the conflict and bringing on a ceasefire. We elevate and honor the criminals so that they represent the will of the faceless Muslim masses in dealing with the only people that matter, and that is us. We are willing to completely overlook what we know is absolutely true, that all of these people are thoroughly corrupt, that they're thoroughly tyrannical, that they wouldn't stay in power one day if there were real democratic institutions in their country. We know that they are criminals, that they torture and murder and rape, and we know that. But there's another thing that Israel does. It is not enough to make sure that there are tyrants that sum up the willpower of the natives and largely package it up and then marginalize it so that we don't have to deal with the Emirati people, the Saudi people, the Egyptian people. We just deal with the Emirati leader, the Saudi leader, the Egyptian leader, who of course are more than willing to forgive Israeli crimes and Israeli racism, and they have no problem whatsoever with whatever crimes Israel commits. But we must do something else. We must change the normative, doctrinal momentums within the Islamic tradition itself. We must demand that Saudi Arabia change its school curriculums. which it did. We must demand that Egypt change its school curriculums, which it did. We must demand that the Emirat changes its school curriculum, which it did. We must recast Islamic theology and Islamic history so that the doctrinal impulse within Muslims themselves to resist tyranny and to resist occupation and to demand rights is snuffed out. We must sanitize Islam from any discourse on jihad. Not only that, but we must make sure that Muslims are confused about the Khilafah. We must make sure that Muslims, although they have no real knowledge, but that Muslims collectively remember the Ottoman Khilafah as oppressive and destructive without any real knowledge. We must make sure that Muslims are confused about the position of Jerusalem in their own history and in their own theology. When I tell you that the racist dynamic is that Arabs and Muslims cease to matter and only matter to the extent that what they do affects or does not affect Israel. It is very much the case. It is not a coincidence that in these days, suddenly we find that the same parties that have started repeating Israeli propaganda that Muslims must apologize, note, Muslims must apologize for the ghazawat of the Prophet ﷺ. That the Prophet acted wrongfully when he fought his battles. And Muslims owe the world an apology for the battles of the Prophet. We hear this from Egyptian intellectuals, we hear this from Saudi intellectuals, we hear this from Emirati intellectuals, but its genesis was with Israeli intellectuals. That Muslims have to apologize for the Islamic expansion during the Amawids, and that the Amawids don't represent a Muslim reality, but simply an aberration. So we must apologize for Islamic Spain. We must apologize for conquering Sicily and Crete. We must apologize for the fall of the Byzantine Empire. But even now, the propaganda has extended to, well, it wasn't an Islamic expansionism, it was an Arab expansionism. And so the Arabs must apologize for conquering Persia. And then if you say the Arabs must apologize for conquering Persia, for conquering the Byzantine Empire, for expanding into Spain, Andalusia, then Islam itself that was brought to all these countries was deeply flawed from its genesis, and it's an aberration. So suddenly, Islam becomes an alien phenomena to Persian society. And Islam becomes an artificial phenomena even to Egypt, which is seen as a pharaonic society. And Islam becomes an artificial phenomena to the Berbers of North Africa. So where is Islam not an artificial phenomenon? Where? In the heart of Arabia. So Islam becomes simply an Arab religion in the same way that Judaism is an Israelite religion. But in order for that to happen, you must sanitize Islam's relationship to the one spot in the world that affirms Islam's universality. And that's Jerusalem. This is why I tell my students, don't you dare say that Jerusalem is the third holy site in Islam. Jerusalem is the first holy site because it is the affirmation of Islam as the religion of Abraham and the religion of Moses and the religion of Isa, Jesus. It is the symbol that Islam started long before Muhammad was born as a prophet. And it is the affirmation that Islam is a gift to humanity and not simply an Arabian peculiarity. You know what I'm saying? Peculiarity. This is why so many Muslims are repeating the ridiculous Israeli propaganda that Jerusalem never mattered until 130 years after the death of the Prophet. 130 years. And then they say, well, you know, it's Yazid who made Jerusalem part of the Islamic legacy. Well, hold on, 130 years, that's way after Yazid. That's number one. So even their numbers is wrong. But it wasn't Yazid. It wasn't Yazid who went after Jerusalem. It was the companions of the Prophet, ﷺ. They understood the minute that the Prophet died that they must expel Byzantia from the lands that they occupy in the east. And they understood that Islam is the representative of monotheism in the world. Christianity is not a monotheistic religion, no matter how much it claims it is. It is not one God. That three-headed God of Christianity has three heads, and thus three brains, and thus three wills. It is not real monotheism. And Judaism has been usurped into a racial identity and a tribal history. Islam is the only pure monotheism. And this is precisely why the companions knew that Jerusalem belonged in Muslim hands. Because Jerusalem always stood for monotheism. And then these remarkably ignorant Muslims come and say, well, wait, isn't the Aqsa Mosque, when the Quran refers to the Aqsa Mosque, there was no mosque there. So how could the Quran refer to the Aqsa Mosque when there was no mosque there? And again, the only way you can say that is if you are relying on Israeli propaganda. Because the historical record is clear and cumulative and documented that that area where the Aqsa Mosque was built continued, there was a structure in this area that was referred to as a place of worship that was not Israelite and was not Christian, but represented the monotheism of Abraham, with some reports that it even had some idols, ironically and paradoxically. But although that's not confirmed. And that's the area that Umar ibn al-Khattab reclaimed and rebuilt. And that the companions of the Prophet ﷺ agreed that, acting on the instructions of the Prophet, that this is the location of the Aqsa Mosque. And that there is no evidence historically whatsoever that the Dome of the Rock was built on the ruins of the first or second temple. Israel since 1948 has been digging and excavating, trying to find any archaeological remains that would prove that this was the location of the second temple, and it has found none. Because if it hadn't been for the fact that the Bible talks about the second temple and the Quran alludes to it, if you were doing objective history, you would doubt that the second temple ever existed. And you would say maybe it's simply historical mythology, because we have no evidence, no archaeological evidence of it. History matters. It is not an exaggeration to say that a people without history are a people without identity and a people without a future. And what Israeli propaganda does in order to neutralize what they believe are dangerous Muslim sentiments is to deconstruct Islamic history while never gazing at its own history, making Muslims doubt everything about their own history. So the fact that there have been generations of Muslims who sacrificed for Jerusalem, who lived and died The fact that the number of Muslim martyrs who fought for Jerusalem cannot be counted doesn't matter. And you are told by Israeli propaganda and by their agents in Egypt and Emirat and Saudi that all these Muslim sacrifices were for nothing. That your prophet was wrong when he brought Islam to Persia and he brought Islam to Iraq and he brought Islam out of Arabia. That your companions and Ahlul Bayt were wrong when they settled in Jerusalem and brought Jerusalem to Islam. That everything about your history is wrong. Nothing is real. Not the Khilafah, not the Ummah, nothing. Even your holy sites, they can be westernized, commercialized, turned into materialistic, commodified entities. Even your holy sites can become about money and luxury. And you have no right to say anything because we don't deal with you, we deal with your tyrannical rulers. We don't care whether the Saudi people like what happened in Mecca, we deal with MBS. We don't care whether the Egyptian people are deeply hurt about what's going on in Gaza, we deal with Sisi, who doesn't allow the Palestinian flag to be raised anywhere in Egypt. Do you see how tyranny itself is racist? Do you see how any Muslim who defends authoritarian rule and defends tyranny is a racist against his or her own people? Do you see when you say the white race and the Israelites are entitled to democracy and rights and civilization, but we Muslims are like cattle? We are entitled to work and consume and shut up and be led like a herd. We're like cattle. Do you see how it's deeply racist? Do you see how you can be a racist against your own people without knowing it? Do you see how racist it is to ignore all the sacrifices and to come to Muslims and say, what's the big deal about Jerusalem? Why don't you forget your history? Forget your companions, forget your prophet, forget your Quran, forget everything, and be happy because we're opening a nightclub, we're importing the latest type of beer, we're holding a wine tasting competition, as happened in the Emirat during Ramadan. We're inviting Nicki Minaj. This should be your happiness. Leave living and the exercising of sovereign will to the white race. But you exercise your right to consume and nothing else. Vote by consuming and nothing else. Don't even talk about politics because political Islam is bad. Political Judaism, Zionism is good. Political Christianity, as in the Christian party that rules Germany and the neocons that ruled the United States so many times is good. But political Islam? No, Muslims exist to consume, not to have a political will. In other words, Muslim exists to be cattle, not to be human. Because all humans are political. And when you say political Islam is bad, you are condemning Muslims to being nothing but a consuming herd. No matter how you dress it up in fancy academic language, the truth is the truth. The truth is the truth. نسأل الله استغفر الله واسأل الله لي ولكم استجب الله لكم ادعوا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد أشرف المرسلين وخاتم النبيين المرسل رحمة للعالمين. Yes. To condemn political Islam is racist. Yes. It is racist. You know why? Because it's invoking the logic of Islamic exceptionalism, which is racist. Human beings have an intellect. And if they use that intellect to solve their problems, they're being political. You can't use your intellect to solve your problems without being political. So you're effectively coming and saying, as Muslims live under tyranny, consume commodities, and shut up and do what you're told. Leave the exercising of sovereign will to the Israelis. Leave it to the Swedes, to the Danish, to the Germans, to the British, to the Americans. Leave it even to the South Americans, to the Brazilians, to the Argentinians. Leave it to the Eastern Europeans, to the Polish, to the Lithuanians, to the Estonians, to the Ukrainians. But you Muslims must accept nothing but tyranny. Because the tyrant rulers that rule over you will package you up and deliver your will to us. So we don't have to worry about you. And not only that, but before you are packaged and delivered to us, we will thoroughly neutralize you and neuter you. We will take away your history. We will take away your theology. We will take away your law. Sharia law, bad word. Islamic ghazawat, bad word. Jihad, bad word. Khilafah, bad word. There's nothing about you that is good. You are only good when you buy products and consume products and shut up. Yeah, wear your hijabs. As long as your hijabs are made in China. Put out your prayer rugs, as long as your prayer rugs are made in China. Play with your beards, with your beads, as long as your beads are made in some other country. Get your zibibas on your foreheads. Have it nice and black and round on your foreheads from all the sujood you do. As long as you have no sovereign will, no political will, as long as you don't say Ya Aqsa, as long as you don't say anything about anything that matters. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because wherever you turn, they are Muslim imams and teachers who are fooling you and delivering you as a herd and cattle. Did you hear Hamza Yusuf's statement on Palestine? The man starts out with pietistic affectations. Pietistic affectations which are used to distract and dilute. A long introduction of Alhamdulillahs and Subhanallahs and Allahu Akbar and A'udhu Billahs, nothing to do with anything. When he finally gets to the point, that's after the introduction that numbs the intellect with religious jargon that is entirely meaningless. It's not unintentional. This is quite intentional. That long introductions of tahmid and tasbih and takbir is pietistic affectations. And it's signaling that check out your intellect, shut off your intellect, because I'm going to talk Islam. And I don't want you thinking when I talk about Islam. And when he finally got to the point, he said Jerusalem is a sacred city and violence in Jerusalem is bad. And we pray for peace in Jerusalem. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Wow. Wow. The Emirati masters have really done a job on you. Wow. No aggressor, no offender, no, Israel has confiscated most of Palestinian territory since Oslo. No, Sheikh Jarrah with Israeli settlers attacking and abusing Palestinians and kicking them out of their homes. No sewage water thrown on the worshippers in Al-Aqsa. No Israeli soldiers arresting the Imam of Al-Aqsa and beating worshippers repeatedly in Ramadan, time and time again. No disproportionate response by Israel in bombing Gaza and destroying the infrastructure. Nothing. And I blame you Muslims, because you are the ones who've made someone like Hamza Yusuf what he is. Of course, typical of Hamza Yusuf, he removed it after he posted it, and someone must have told him this is really bad. This really shows the extent to which you are part of a colonial project. Remove it. So he removed it. But the poison of the theology that you are taught and the fate of our ummah you will meet your Lord. And I am sure that when you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah is not going to tell you, did you follow my sunnah? in your beards and in your hijabs and in your miswaks and in your perfumes, or did you go to the bathroom stepping with the right foot in and the left foot out and do a dance in between, right foot in, left foot out, and a dance? Allah is not going to ask you about any of that. Allah is going to ask you to follow the sunnah in upholding the dignity and the ummah of the Prophet. Have you lived in izzah and dignity? Have you testified on my behalf? Or have you betrayed everything and turned into Islam into a colorless, odorless, tasteless thing that is all about optics and appearances and affectations? I am sure, and I hope you come to the same belief before it's too late. And Allah is the decisive judge between me and you. I believe in the hereafter I will point at you and say, Allah, I've warned them, but they did not listen. And I believe that you will have no grounds to stand on and point at me, because you don't hold the truth and you don't stand for the truth. Ya Allah, help this ummah wake up. Help this ummah wake up. Allahumma aghfir lana. Allahumma afu anna. Allahumma arhamna. Allahumma ahdina li aqraba min hadha rashada ya Rabbal Alameen. Allah, forgive our sins. Guide us to the straight path. Guide us to a better course and a better path than the one we are on. Allah, help us reclaim our faith and reclaim our dignity and reclaim the place of the Muslim Ummah. Ya Ali, Ya Azim, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim. Salli wa sallim wa barik ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa aqim as-salam.